Family disappeared. During road trip, 15 years later, their van is discovered in a forest sinkhole. The morning of July 17, 2008, dawned with a perfect blue sky over the small suburb of Oak Ridge, Colorado. James Mitchell, a 42-year-old civil engineer, was loading the last of their luggage into the navy blue Chrysler Town & Country minivan for their long-awaited family vacation. His wife Rebecca, a 40-year-old high school biology teacher, was checking her essentials list for the third time. "Are you sure you packed Ethan's allergy medication?" Rebecca asked, adjusting her glasses as she consulted her meticulously organized checklist. "It's in the cooler bag with the other meds," James replied with a patient smile. After 15 years of marriage, he knew his wife's need for organization and planning well. Outside, their children, Emma, 14, and Ethan, 10, were caught between excitement and the reluctance typical of their respective ages. Emma, with headphones firmly placed over her brown hair, kept her gaze fixed on her cell phone screen, occasionally sighing to demonstrate she'd rather be anywhere else. Ethan, on the other hand, couldn't contain his enthusiasm, bouncing around the minivan. "Will we see bears in the park, Dad? My teacher said there are black bears in Yellowstone," Ethan asked, his eyes shining with anticipation as he adjusted his Colorado Rockies cap. "Possibly, buddy, but from a distance, I hope. We'll be lucky if we spot some from afar," James responded, playfully ruffling his son's hair under the cap. Rebecca finally gave the signal that everything was ready. The trip they had planned for months would finally begin. 2 weeks exploring Yellowstone and Grand Teton National Parks, with stops in small towns along the way. It was the first major family trip since James had recovered from a back surgery that had kept him desk-bound for nearly a year. "Last bathroom break before we hit the road," Rebecca announced, her teacher's voice automatically slipping into what Emma called her field trip mode. As they pulled out of their driveway, neighbors Dave and Carol Watson waved from their front yard. The Watsons would be collecting their mail and watering the houseplants while they were away. "Send us pictures of the geysers," Carol called out as the minivan reversed into the street. James honked twice in response, and they were off. The first day of travel went exactly as planned. Rebecca had mapped out their route with precision, scheduling stops every 2 hours and booking a motel in Rock Springs, Wyoming for the night. The kids were well behaved, entertained by the games and snacks Rebecca had strategically packed. Even Emma eventually removed her headphones and joined in the family's excited chatter about the adventures awaiting them. On the morning of July 18th, they checked out of the motel early, eager to make it to Jackson Hole by nightfall. The route would take them through some of Wyoming's most spectacular but remote landscapes, including stretches where cell service was notorious for being unreliable at best, non-existent at worst. "I've got the paper maps in the glove compartment," Rebecca reminded James as she noticed the GPS signal flickering, "and the emergency kit is under your seat." "Always prepared," James smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. "That's why we make a good team." The weather began to change as they ventured deeper into Wyoming's wilderness. Clouds gathered on the horizon, and the forecast on the radio warned of possible thunderstorms in the mountains. "Maybe we should take Highway 30 instead of the scenic route through the forest roads," Rebecca suggested, eyeing the darkening sky with concern. James checked the map quickly before responding. "That would add at least 2 hours to our drive. The storm might blow over, and we'd miss the overlook I read about. Let's stick to the plan, but we can reassess if the weather gets worse." Around noon, they stopped at a small diner in the town of Marbleton, the last significant settlement before the stretch of forest roads that would take them toward Jackson. The diner was typical small-town America: checkered tablecloths, strong coffee, and a chatty waitress named Dot who offered advice on local road conditions. "That forest road gets tricky in the rain," she warned as she refilled James's coffee cup. "Lots of switchbacks, and there was a small landslide last month that's still being cleared. They've got it down to 1 lane in spots." "Is there another route you'd recommend?" Rebecca asked, her teacher's instinct for caution kicking in. "Highway 30's longer but safer," Dot replied, echoing Rebecca's earlier suggestion. "Or you could wait out the storm here. We've got a small motel next door, nothing fancy but clean." James checked his watch. "We've got at least 4 hours of daylight left. I think we'll be fine if we head out now, before the worst of the storm hits." Rebecca didn't look convinced. but she didn't push the issue. James had spent hours researching this route, planning the perfect spots for photographs, and he'd been looking forward to driving through the forest since they began planning the trip. They left the diner at 1:15 p.m., with Ethan happily clutching a to-go box containing a slice of Dot's famous huckleberry pie. The sky had darkened considerably, but no rain had fallen yet. "Let me know when we reach the forest road turnoff," Rebecca said, settling into the passenger seat with her guidebook open. "There's supposed to be a ranger station where we can check conditions." "Will do," James replied, turning up the radio as the weather report came on again. The last verified sighting of the Mitchell family was at 2:23 p.m. when they stopped at the ranger station at the entrance to the Bridger-Teton National Forest. The logbook contained James's neat signature and a note indicating they were heading toward Jackson Hole. The ranger on duty, Ron Simmons, later recalled advising them to consider an alternate route due to the approaching storm, but said the family decided to continue on their planned path. At 3:47 p.m., Rebecca sent her last text message to Carol Watson. "Poor cell service here, driving through gorgeous forest. Storm coming, but should reach Jackson before it hits hard. We'll call when we get to the hotel." That text message, which pinged off a tower at the edge of the forest, was the final communication from any member of the Mitchell family. By nightfall, their reserved room at the Jackson Lake Lodge remained empty. By the following morning, when they failed to check in or make contact, the hotel called the number listed on their reservation. Back in Oak Ridge, Carol Watson received the call, setting in motion a search that would span 15 years, becoming one of the most baffling disappearances in Wyoming history. "They never arrived?" Carol repeated, panic rising in her voice. "But that's not possible. They're the most reliable people I know. Rebecca texted me yesterday afternoon. They were on their way." Within 24 hours, search and rescue teams were combing the forest roads. The weather had indeed turned severe, with heavy rainfall causing flash floods and small landslides throughout the region. Visibility was poor, hampering aerial searches. Days turned into weeks. The Mitchell's navy blue minivan with Colorado license plate MTL 847 was added to the national database of missing vehicles. Their faces appeared on news broadcasts nationwide. Volunteers from Oak Ridge drove to Wyoming to join the search efforts. The case captured national attention. An entire family vanishing on a well-traveled route was unusual and deeply unsettling. Search teams covered hundreds of miles of forest roads, ravines, and riversides. Divers checked lakes and deep pools along the route. Cadaver dogs were brought in. Nothing was found, no skid marks indicating an accident, no debris from a vehicle, no personal belongings. It was as if the Mitchell family and their minivan had simply evaporated in the mountain air. As months passed, theories multiplied. Some believed they had been victims of a carjacking gone wrong. Others suspected they had intentionally disappeared, though financial investigations showed no suspicious activity in their accounts. The most prevalent theory was that their van had gone off the road at a spot where it couldn't be seen from above, perhaps into one of the area's deep ravines or dense forest sections. By the one-year anniversary of their disappearance, the active search had been scaled back. The case remained open, but leads had dried up. In Oak Ridge, the Mitchell's home sat empty, preserved by Carol and Dave Watson, as if the family might return any day. Emma and Ethan's schools held memorial services. Friends and colleagues established scholarships in their names. Life in Oak Ridge continued, but the mystery of what happened to the Mitchell family hung over the community like a persistent shadow, a reminder that sometimes people leave home and never return, their fate an unanswered question that haunts those left behind. Little did anyone know that the answer lay buried beneath soil and stone, waiting to be uncovered by events no one could have predicted, 15 years in the future. Chapter 2. 15 Years of Searching. Detective Sarah Lindsay had just joined the Wyoming State Police when the Mitchell case landed on her desk. Fresh out of the academy in 2008, with a law degree and a passion for cold cases, she had been assigned to help organize the case files as the active search wound down. Now, 15 years later, she was the only officer still regularly working the case, albeit unofficially. "Happy anniversary to us," she murmured to the cardboard box she pulled from beneath her desk. Every July 18th, she spent the day reviewing the Mitchell files, looking for something, anything she might have missed. At 49, Detective Lindsay's once auburn hair now showed strands of gray, and the lines around her eyes had deepened with each passing year. What hadn't changed was her methodical approach and stubborn refusal to give up on cases others considered hopeless. "Still chasing ghosts, Lindsay?" Detective Mark Ramirez asked, depositing a coffee cup on her desk. At 36, he had heard about the Mitchell case throughout his career, but had never understood his colleague's obsession with it. "4 people in a minivan don't just disappear without a trace," she replied without looking up, a response she had given so many times it had become automatic. "There's an answer somewhere in these files." "It's been 15 years, Ramirez said gently. "Maybe it's time to what? Accept that they vanished into thin air? That's not how the world works, Mark. They're somewhere, and something in these files is the key to finding them." What Lindsay couldn't articulate, even to herself, was why this particular case had become her life's work. Perhaps it was the ordinary nature of the Mitchell family, hard-working parents, typical teenagers, a vacation many American families might take. Perhaps it was the expressions in the family photos, which she had studied so often she felt she knew each family member personally, or perhaps it was simply that this had been her first major case, and its lack of resolution represented her own incomplete journey as a detective. 300 miles away in Oak Ridge, Carol Watson was also marking the anniversary, as she had every year since her neighbors and friends had vanished. Now 71, she still maintained the small memorial garden she had planted in her front yard. 4 rose bushes, 1 for each Mitchell family member. Dave had passed away 3 years earlier, but Carol continued their tradition of keeping the Mitchell's story alive in the community. Today, she was hosting the annual gathering for friends, former colleagues, and students of the Mitchells. What had begun as a somber vigil had evolved over the years into a celebration of the family's lives and legacy. "Mrs. Mitchell would love seeing all her former students," remarked Michael Chen, once a shy freshman in Rebecca's biology class, now a biology teacher himself at the same high school. "She's the reason I became a teacher, and James would be proud to see how his infrastructure projects have held up," added Robert Jensen, who had worked with James at the engineering firm. "The Peterson Bridge he designed is still the safest in the county." Carol nodded, gazing at the enlarged family photo displayed on an easel in her living room. It was the last picture taken of the Mitchells, a Christmas card photo from 2007, showing them in matching sweaters, Emma rolling her eyes but smiling despite herself, Ethan beaming with his arm around the family dog, Max, who had died a year after their disappearance, seeming to wait for their return until the very end. "I still dream about them," Carol confessed quietly to Susan Porter, who had been Rebecca's best friend. "Not bad dreams, just dreams where they come back and explain they were living in another country, or had amnesia, or some explanation that makes this all make sense." Susan squeezed her hand. "I know, I think we all hoped for something like that in the early years." The gathering in Carol's living room represented the lasting impact the Mitchell family had on their community. Rebecca's former students, now adults with careers and families of their own. James's colleagues, who had established a scholarship fund in his name for engineering students. Parents of Emma and Ethan's classmates, who had supported search efforts year after year. What none of them knew was that at that very moment, hundreds of miles away in the Bridger-Teton National Forest, events were unfolding that would finally provide the answers they had sought for 15 years. Luke Blackwood had been a park ranger in Bridger-Teton for only 6 months, but he already loved the job more than any he'd held before. At 28, after stints in the military, and then as a wilderness guide, he had found his calling in the ranger service, protecting the land he had loved since childhood camping trips with his Navajo grandfather. July 18, 2023, started as a routine day, patrolling the eastern section of his assigned area, checking on campsites, and monitoring for fire hazards during what had been an unusually dry summer. He was making his way back to his vehicle when the ground literally shifted beneath his feet. The sensation was subtle at first, a tremor he might have imagined, but as he took another step, the earth gave way with a sickening lurch. Luke flung himself backward, scrambling away as a section of the forest floor collapsed with a dull roar, leaving a gaping hole where solid ground had been moments before. Heart racing, Luke cautiously approached the edge of what appeared to be a sinkhole about 30 feet in diameter. The collapse had exposed layers of soil, rock, and tree roots, forming a rough funnel that descended into darkness. "Dispatch, this is Ranger Blackwood," he radioed, his voice steadier than he felt. "I've got a significant ground collapse on Forest Road 237, about 3 miles east of Mirror Lake Junction. Area appears unstable. Requesting geological assessment team." "Copy that, Ranger Blackwood. Any immediate hazards to visitors?" "Negative. This section is currently closed for trail maintenance, no scheduled tours or campers in the vicinity." Luke began setting up warning markers around the perimeter, maintaining a safe distance from the edge. As he worked, something caught his eye, a metallic glint from within the sinkhole, revealed by the afternoon sunlight penetrating the new opening. Protocol dictated he should wait for the assessment team, but curiosity and a sense of duty pulled him closer to the edge. Using his field binoculars, he tried to identify the source of the reflection. What he saw made his blood run cold. Partially buried under soil and debris, about 20 feet down, was what appeared to be a vehicle. The exposed section showed navy blue paint and what might be part of a wheel well. "Dispatch," he radioed again, his voice now tight with urgency. "That geological team, we need them ASAP, and you'd better send search and rescue. I think I've found a vehicle in this sinkhole. No way to tell if there are occupants from my position." "Copy that. SAR team is being notified. ETA approximately 45 minutes. Maintain position and continue monitoring. Do not attempt entry into the unstable area." "Understood." Luke paced at a safe distance from the hole, checking his watch every few minutes. The possibility that he might be looking at a recent accident, with people potentially trapped inside the vehicle, made the wait excruciating. But the visible parts of the vehicle told a different story. This was no recent crash. The paint was faded, and what he could see of the metal showed significant corrosion. When the search and rescue team arrived, led by veteran rescuer Maria Gonzalez, Luke quickly briefed them on his discovery. "How long do you think it's been down there?" Maria asked as her team began setting up ropes and safety equipment. "Hard to tell, but it's not recent," Luke replied. "From what little I can see, that vehicle has been buried for years." The team worked methodically, first ensuring the surrounding area was stable enough for a rescue operation, then preparing for a controlled descent into the sinkhole. A drone was deployed to map the cavity and get better images of the vehicle. "It's a minivan," the drone operator confirmed, showing the team the footage. "Chrysler Town and Country, looks like. Can't make out the plates from this angle." Maria made the decision to send down 2 team members secured by safety lines. Luke watched as they disappeared into the hole, their headlamps creating dancing points of light in the darkness below. 20 tense minutes passed before the radio crackled. "Base, this is Rodriguez. We've reached the vehicle. It's definitely been here a long time. The earth gave way beneath it, looks like. It settled on a rock shelf about 30 feet down. The ground must have been hollowed out underneath it for years before finally collapsing." "Any sign of occupants?" Maria asked, her expression grim. A long pause followed. "Affirmative, we have remains. Multiple occupants. Can't determine exact number yet without disturbing the scene too much." A collective heaviness settled over the team. What had begun as a geological incident had transformed into something far more somber, the discovery of what was almost certainly a tragic accident. "Rodriguez, can you see a license plate or any identifying features?" Another pause, then. "Partial plate visible. MTL. The rest is obscured by dirt. But wait, there's something else. A bumper sticker. Colorado Rockies." Luke saw Maria's expression change instantly. "MTL could match the Mitchell case," she said quietly to the team. "Colorado plates, navy blue minivan, Rockies bumper sticker. Get Sheriff Camden on the radio. Tell him we may have found the Mitchell family." Within hours, the quiet forest road had transformed into a hub of activity. Sheriff Camden arrived with Detective Lindsay, who had driven 3 hours at breakneck speed after receiving the call. Crime scene technicians set up floodlights as dusk approached. The medical examiner's mobile unit stood by, ready to receive remains once they could be safely recovered. Detective Lindsay stood at the edge of the perimeter, her face showing the complex emotions of someone who might finally get answers to questions that had consumed 15 years of her life. The road they were traveling runs about 50 yards that way, she said to Luke, pointing through the trees. This section wasn't here in 2008. It was added during the Forest Road expansion in 2010. So they went off the original road? Luke asked. That's my guess. The storm that day was severe. Flash floods, landslides in some areas. They might have hit a washout or slid off a curve. But why weren't they found during the search? The answer came from the Geological Assessment Team leader, Dr. Helen Chen, who had been studying the formation of the sinkhole. This area sits above a network of limestone caves, she explained, pointing to her terrain maps. Water erosion has been creating hollows beneath the surface for decades. What likely happened is that their vehicle went off the original road and landed on a thin section of ground above one of these hollow areas. So they were literally swallowed by the earth? Sheriff Camden asked. Dr. Chen nodded grimly. The impact probably wasn't enough to break through immediately, but it could have created cracks that accelerated the erosion process. Over time, soil and vegetation would have covered any surface evidence of the accident. The ground beneath gradually gave way until the vehicle settled in a larger cavity below. Today's collapse finally exposed it. As night fell, recovery efforts were temporarily halted for safety reasons. Floodlights illuminated the scene, casting long shadows through the forest. Detective Lindsay refused to leave, keeping a solitary vigil at the site where the family she had searched for all these years might finally have been found. 15 years, she murmured to Luke, who had also stayed behind. 15 years wondering if they'd been kidnapped, if they'd run away, if they'd suffered, and they were here all along. At least now their families can have answers. Luke offered quietly. Lindsay nodded, her gaze fixed on the illuminated sinkhole. That's all we can give them now. Answers. And maybe a proper goodbye. The morning sun filtered through the pine trees as recovery operations resumed. Overnight, a specialized team had arrived with equipment designed for delicate excavations. The atmosphere was somber, every person on site acutely aware that this was not just a recovery mission, but the final chapter in a 15-year mystery that had haunted 2 states. Detective Lindsay hadn't slept. She had spent the night reviewing the Mitchell case files in her car, refreshing her memory on every detail. Now she stood watching as the team carefully stabilized the sinkhole to prevent further collapse during the recovery. Sheriff Camden approached, offering her a cup of steaming coffee. Positive ID on the vehicle, he said quietly. Colorado plate MTL 847, it's them, Sarah. She nodded, unable to speak for a moment. Then professional instincts taking over. We need to notify the Watson woman in Oak Ridge before the media gets hold of this, and we'll need dental records for comparison. Already in progress. My office contacted the Oak Ridge PD at dawn. They're sending everything we need and handling the notification personally. In Oak Ridge, Carol Watson was tending to her Memorial Rose Garden when Police Chief Diana Monroe's car pulled up. Something about the official vehicle and the chief's solemn expression as she approached the front gate told Carol exactly why she had come. They found them, Carol said. It wasn't a question. Chief Monroe nodded. May I come in, Mrs. Watson? I have some information about the Mitchell family. Inside, Carol listened with tears streaming down her face as Chief Monroe explained the discovery in Wyoming. When she had finished, Carol asked just one question. Were they together? Yes, Mrs. Watson. From the preliminary reports, it appears all 4 were together in the vehicle. Carol nodded, finding a small measure of comfort in this knowledge. I always told people they wouldn't have separated, not that family. Rebecca and James would have kept those children close no matter what happened. Back at the sinkhole, the recovery operation proceeded with painstaking care. Each step was documented, photographed, and recorded, not just for the investigation, but out of respect for the family, whose final moments were being revealed after so many years. By mid-afternoon, the vehicle had been partially excavated, allowing a clearer view of what had happened. The minivan had indeed gone off the original road during the 2008 storm, likely due to a flash flood that had washed away part of the roadbed. It had landed on a section of ground above a limestone cavity, becoming gradually buried by soil washed down from the hillside over subsequent rainy seasons. The ground beneath eventually gave way, Dr. Chen explained to Detective Lindsay as they observed the operation. The van settled into a larger cavity below, approximately 20 feet down. Over time, more erosion occurred, creating this network of connected hollows. Today's collapse finally exposed it to the surface. As recovery workers carefully removed debris from around the vehicle, personal items began to emerge. A Colorado Rockies cap, a biology guidebook, a teenager's backpack still containing a portable CD player. Each item was carefully cataloged and placed in evidence bags, pieces of the Mitchell family's interrupted journey, finally seeing daylight again. The most significant discovery came in the early evening. A worker carefully extracted a waterproof hiking backpack from the rear of the vehicle, remarkably well preserved despite years underground. Inside was a plastic container sealed with duct tape, and within that, protected from the elements, was a notebook. The moment Detective Lindsay opened it, she knew they had found something extraordinary. James Mitchell's journal, with entries that continued for days after the accident. "They survived the initial crash," she whispered, scanning the pages with growing horror and sadness. "They were alive down there." The journal told the devastating story of the Mitchell family's final days. The first entry, dated July 18, 2008, described how a flash flood had washed away part of the road as they rounded a curve. James had tried to brake, but the minivan had slid over the edge, rolling once before coming to rest on what felt like solid ground, though they were surrounded by darkness and couldn't see where they had landed. "Rebecca has a broken arm and possible concussion. Emma seems okay physically, but is in shock. Ethan has a gash on his leg that I've bandaged with our first aid kit. I've hurt my back again, but can move. The van landed upright, but we're surrounded by dirt and rock. Can't see the road above. Cell phones show no service. Using flashlights sparingly to conserve batteries. We'll try to climb out at first light." The subsequent entries detailed their increasingly desperate situation. James had attempted to climb out, but found the walls of the cavity were unstable, causing small landslides when disturbed. Their calls for help went unanswered. The van's horn worked but seemed muffled, suggesting they were well isolated from the road above. By the third day, their emergency water supply was running dangerously low. Rebecca's condition had worsened, her concussion causing periods of confusion. Ethan's leg showed signs of infection despite their attempts to keep it clean. July 21st. No sign of rescuers. Not sure if they're searching the right area. Tried again to climb out, but the walls are too unstable and my back can't take it. Emma suggested we take turns honking the horn every hour to conserve battery but still signal. Rationing the last of our water. Ethan wants to know when we're going home. Don't know what to tell him. The final entry, dated July 23rd, was barely legible. Written in failing light with a weakening hand. Rebecca unconscious since morning. Ethan's fever very high. Emma trying to be strong, but I can see she's scared. Air getting stale down here. Hard to breathe. If anyone finds this, we love you. Please tell our families we were together until the end, and we weren't afraid. Mitchell family. Together always. The journal fell silent after that, the remaining pages blank, but the final message spoke volumes about James Mitchell's character and his love for his family. Detective Lindsay carefully closed the journal, her vision blurred by tears she couldn't hold back. "We need to make sure this gets to their family," she said. "They deserve to know that they weren't just abandoned out here, that people looked for them, that they matter." The medical examiner confirmed what the journal had suggested. The family had not died immediately from crash injuries, but had survived for several days. The cause of death was ultimately determined to be a combination of dehydration, injuries, and likely carbon dioxide poisoning, as the air in their underground tomb had been depleted. News of the discovery spread quickly. By nightfall, media outlets had set up near the forest road, reporting on the resolution of one of the region's most enduring mysteries. For the first time in 15 years, headlines about the Mitchell family offered answers rather than questions. In Oak Ridge, Carol Watson's home became an impromptu gathering place as friends of the family came to share memories and support each other through the complicated grief that came with final confirmation of what most had long suspected but couldn't accept without proof. Michael Chen, who had followed in Rebecca's footsteps as a biology teacher, addressed the small crowd assembled in Carol's living room. "Mrs. Mitchell taught us that science is about finding answers to difficult questions. I think she would appreciate that science finally brought her family home, even if it's not the outcome we hoped for all these years. 3 days after the discovery, a convoy of vehicles traveled from the forest site to the county medical examiner's office. The Mitchell family made their final journey together, escorted by police cars and followed by a procession of Forest Service vehicles, including Luke Blackwood's Ranger truck. For Detective Lindsay, the case that had defined her career was finally reaching its conclusion. As she followed the convoy, her mind kept returning to the final page of James Mitchell's journal and the strength it must have taken to write those last words of love and reassurance, even as hope faded. "Together until the end," she murmured to herself. "That's something, at least." The summer sun beat down on Oak Ridge Cemetery as hundreds of people gathered for a service 15 years delayed. 4 caskets, 1 large, 1 medium, and 2 smaller, stood side by side, draped with flower arrangements containing roses from Carol Watson's Memorial Garden. After confirmation of identity through dental and DNA analysis, the Mitchell family had finally come home to Oak Ridge. The town had transformed for the occasion, with black ribbons adorning street lamps and businesses closing for the afternoon out of respect. The high school where Rebecca had taught, and the engineering firm where James had worked, had jointly established a scholarship fund in the family's name. Detective Sarah Lindsay sat in the back row, feeling both part of this community's grief and separate from it. She had lived with the Mitchell case for so long that she felt she knew the family intimately, yet she had never met them in life. Next to her sat Luke Blackwood, who had requested leave to attend the service, feeling a connection to the family whose fate he had helped uncover. Carol Watson, now the keeper of the Mitchell's legacy, stood shakily with the support of Chief Monroe as she addressed the gathered mourners. "For 15 years we've lived with questions," she began, her voice wavering but determined. "We've lived with what-ifs and if-onlys. We've lived with the cruelest kind of hope, the kind that wouldn't let us fully grieve, but also wouldn't let us heal. Today we finally lay to rest not just James, Rebecca, Emma, and Ethan, but also the questions that have haunted us. We know what happened now. We know they were together until the end. We know from James's own words that they weren't afraid." She paused, looking toward the caskets. "I've spent 15 years keeping their memory alive, tending to roses that represented each of them. But now I realize that they never needed my roses to be remembered. Their legacy lives on in every student Rebecca inspired, in every structure James designed, in every life Emma and Ethan touched in their brief time with us. The Mitchell family is coming home today, not the way we hoped all those years, but they're coming home nonetheless. And now, finally, we can all begin to heal." After the service, a smaller group gathered at the Mitchell's former home, which had been maintained all these years by a trust established by James's engineering firm. The house had been cleaned and prepared, but otherwise remained frozen in time. Family photos on the walls, Emma's rock collection displayed on her windowsill, Ethan's space-themed bedspread still on his bed. Detective Lindsay walked slowly through the rooms, seeing the physical manifestation of the family she had carried in her mind for 15 years. In the kitchen, a calendar from July 2008 still hung on the wall, the dates of their planned vacations circled in red marker. On the refrigerator, held by magnets, were Emma's high school course selection form for the fall semester she never attended, and a drawing Ethan had made of their family standing beside what appeared to be Old Faithful. "It's strange, isn't it?" Carol said, finding Lindsay staring at the refrigerator. "Seeing all their plans, all their tomorrows that never came." Lindsay nodded. "I've had their case files for 15 years, but being here, seeing their lives as they left them, it makes them real in a different way." "Rebecca would have liked you," Carol said unexpectedly. "She appreciated persistence, people who wouldn't give up on finding answers. I wish I'd found them sooner. You never stopped looking. That matters." Later, as the gathering began to disperse, Luke found himself standing with Detective Lindsay in the Mitchell's backyard, where a tire swing still hung from a large oak tree. "What happens now?" he asked. "To the house, to their things. According to James's will, which was finally executed now that they've been legally declared deceased, everything goes to their families. Rebecca's sister is flying in from Australia next week to help sort through their belongings." Lindsay paused, looking around the yard where a family had once played and planned and lived. "Some of it will go to museums, actually. The Oak Ridge Historical Society and the Wyoming State Museum both want to create exhibits about the case, making something meaningful from tragedy. Luke nodded. That's what we try to do, isn't it? As investigators, as rangers, we try to make meaning out of the chaos, find the patterns, provide the answers. They stood in silence for a moment before Luke spoke again. Will you stop being a detective now that your big case is solved? Lindsay smiled slightly. I've asked myself that. For 15 years, finding the Mitchell family has been my mission. Now that it's over, what's next? She shook her head. But then I think about how many other families are out there waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. How many other cases are sitting in boxes under detectives' desks, waiting for someone stubborn enough to keep looking. So, on to the next case. After a long vacation, she admitted. 15 years is a long time to carry someone else's story. Inside the house, Carol Watson carefully placed James Mitchell's journal, now processed as evidence and returned to the family, on the desk in the study. The journal had been published in part, with the family's permission, providing answers to the questions that had lingered for 15 years. But some passages remained private, final words between a father and his family that belonged to them alone. Carol opened the journal to its final page, reading once more the words that had brought so many to tears. We love you. Please tell our families we were together until the end, and we weren't afraid. Mitchell family, together always. She closed the book gently and switched off the desk lamp. Outside, the summer sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across Oak Ridge. The town had its answers now. The mystery that had defined it for so long was solved. Life would continue, altered but unbroken, carrying forward the legacy of a family who had gone on a vacation 15 years ago and finally, today, had come home. In the forest where they had been found, a small memorial was placed by the Wyoming Forest Service. A simple stone marker with 4 names and the words, "Found at last, together always." Rangers like Luke Blackwood would make sure it was maintained, a quiet reminder of how fragile life can be, and how the earth itself sometimes keeps secrets for years before revealing them. Detective Sarah Lindsay would go on to specialize in cold cases, applying the same determination that she had shown in the Mitchell case to other families waiting for answers. The journal she had carried for 15 years, the case that had defined her career, was finally closed, but the lessons it taught her about perseverance and closure would inform every investigation that followed. As the first stars appeared in the sky above Oak Ridge, Carol Watson stood on her porch looking at the 4 rose bushes she had tended for 15 years. Tomorrow she would begin the process of creating a proper memorial garden in the town park, a place where Rebecca's students could remember their teacher, where the structures James designed could be celebrated, where the brief, bright lives of Emma and Ethan would continue to inspire. The Mitchell family had disappeared on a summer day 15 years ago, but in many ways, they had never truly left Oak Ridge. Their legacy lived on in the lives they had touched, the lessons they had taught, and the love that had kept them together until the very end. Some mysteries are never solved. Some questions remain forever unanswered. But for the Mitchell family and the communities they had left behind, the uncertainty was finally over. They had been found. They had come home. And in the end, they had never really been lost at all. They had remained exactly what James had written in his final words. Together. Always. 5 years had passed since the discovery of the Mitchell family. The sinkhole in the Bridger-Teton National Forest had long since been filled and secured, with a proper memorial installed nearby. The site had become something of a pilgrimage spot, not just for those who had known the Mitchells, but for many who had been touched by their story. Luke Blackwood, now the head ranger for this section of the forest, made it a point to visit the memorial on July 18th each year. This morning he stood there with his hat in hand, reflecting on how one chance discovery had changed so many lives, including his own. "I had a feeling I'd find you here," came a familiar voice behind him. Luke turned to see Sarah Lindsay approaching along the forest path. Her hair was fully gray now, but her stride was still purposeful, her eyes still sharp. "Annual tradition," he replied with a smile. "You came all the way from Cheyenne for this?" "Wouldn't miss it," she said, coming to stand beside him at the memorial. "Besides, I had business in Jackson anyway. The cold case unit is training local police on new search techniques. After the Mitchell case, Sarah had been promoted to lead Wyoming's newly established cold case division, focusing particularly on long-term missing persons. Under her leadership, the unit had resolved 7 previously unsolvable disappearances, bringing closure to families who had waited years, sometimes decades, for answers. "How's Carol doing?" Luke asked, glancing at the fresh flowers someone had placed at the base of the memorial stone. "Strong as ever," Sarah replied. "The Mitchell Memorial Garden in Oak Ridge has become quite the attraction. She gives tours to school groups now, telling them not just about the disappearance, but about who the Mitchells were, James's engineering innovations, Rebecca's teaching methods, Emma's art, Ethan's science experiments." Luke nodded, appreciating how the narrative had shifted from tragedy to legacy. "The Forest Service has incorporated the Mitchell case into all our safety briefings. We've installed ground-penetrating radar equipment in search vehicles, and all rangers are trained on limestone karst formations now. Their story has probably saved lives." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating how a family they'd never met in life had changed their professional paths so profoundly. "I got a letter from Rebecca's sister last week," Sarah said eventually. "She's publishing a book. Not about the disappearance or discovery. There have been enough of those, but about their lives. Who they were before that vacation, what they meant to their community." "That sounds right," Luke nodded. "They were more than just a mystery or a tragedy." A family with 3 children approached the memorial, the parents solemn, the kids curious. The oldest, a girl of perhaps 12, recognized Luke's ranger uniform. "Are you the one who found them?" she asked. "Yes," Luke replied simply. "And you're the detective who never stopped looking," the youngest boy exclaimed, pointing at Sarah. "We learned about you in school last year." Sarah looked momentarily taken aback, then smiled. "I was just doing my job. Our teacher said it's important to remember them as people, not just as a sad story." The girl continued thoughtfully. She said the daughter would be about 30 now, maybe with kids of her own. "Your teacher sounds very wise," Luke said. After the family moved on, Sarah turned to Luke with a pensive expression. "It's becoming history to them, just a story they learn in school. But the right kind of story," Luke pointed out. "About persistence, about remembering people for who they were, not just how they died." They began walking back toward the parking area, the summer sun warm on their shoulders. "I'm consulting on a similar case in Idaho next month," Sarah mentioned. "A family of 3 went missing in 2001. Car never found. The terrain is similar to this area. Lots of ravines, limestone formations. Still looking for answers," Luke observed. "Always," Sarah nodded. "But I learned from the Mitchell case not to let it consume me. There's a difference between dedication and obsession. I visit their graves when I'm in Oak Ridge, but I don't carry their files everywhere anymore." "Closure works both ways," Luke agreed. "For the families of the missing, but also for those of us who search." When they reached the parking lot, they paused by their respective vehicles. For a moment, they were again the ranger and detective standing at a newly discovered sinkhole, confronting a 15-year-old mystery, connected by circumstances neither could have predicted. "Same time next year?" Luke asked. "Wouldn't miss it," Sarah replied. The Mitchells deserve to be remembered. As Sarah drove back toward Jackson, she reflected on how the case had transformed not just her career, but her understanding of what it meant to search for the missing. It wasn't just about solving puzzles or closing files. It was about honoring lives interrupted, about preserving stories that might otherwise be lost. In Oak Ridge, the Mitchell Memorial Garden was in full summer bloom. Carol Watson, now approaching 80, guided a group of middle school students through the pathways between carefully tended flowers and informational plaques. "Rebecca Mitchell taught science at your very school," she told them, stopping by a section of native plants. "She believed in learning by doing, by observing the natural world firsthand. These plants were all species she used in her botany lessons." The students listened with surprising attention, perhaps because Carol spoke not of abstract historical figures, but of real people who had walked the same hallways they did, who had lived and laughed and loved in their own town. "And James," Carol continued, moving to another section featuring a small bridge over a decorative stream. "Designed bridges and water systems. This miniature version is based on his plans for the Peterson Bridge, which many of you cross every day on your way to school. One girl raised her hand. My mom was in Mrs. Mitchell's class. She says she still uses things she learned there. Carol smiled. That's how people live on, through what they teach us, what they build, how they touch our lives. In the 15 years since the Mitchell family disappeared, and the 5 years since they were found, their story had evolved from a baffling mystery to a cautionary tale about natural hazards to, finally, a testament to the lasting impact of ordinary lives well lived. The Mitchell home, preserved for so long as if awaiting their return, had found new purpose as a vacation retreat for families who couldn't otherwise afford getaways, a project spearheaded by Rebecca's sister after inheriting the property. The scholarship funds established in James and Rebecca's names had helped dozens of students pursue careers in engineering and education. Emma's artwork, preserved by her art teacher, traveled as part of an exhibition showcasing young talent. Ethan's detailed nature journals inspired a junior naturalist program at the local elementary school. Back in the forest, as dusk approached, Luke made one final visit to the Mitchell Memorial before heading home. He had developed a habit of speaking to them, especially when alone at the site. 5 years since we found you, he said quietly. I wish it could have been sooner, but I'm glad you made it home. A gentle breeze rustled through the trees, and somewhere in the distance a bird called to its mate. The forest, which had kept the Mitchell family's secret for so long, now seemed to embrace their memory, incorporating it into its ancient rhythms. The final line of James Mitchell's journal had become something of a mantra for those connected to the case. Together, always. More than a family motto or a final comfort, it had come to represent the enduring connections between all involved. The family, their friends, the searchers, the community, even the strangers touched by their story. As darkness fell and the first stars appeared, the forest grew quiet. The memorial stone stood sentinel, its simple message illuminated by moonlight. Found at last, together always. In memory, in legacy, in the impact they left on countless lives, the Mitchell family had indeed found a kind of immortality. Their journey had ended in that quiet forest spot, but their story, their true story, continued to unfold in ways none could have predicted. Not just a tragedy that ended in a sinkhole, but a legacy of love that remained exactly what James had written in those final days. Together, always.